So in this video, I'm going to talk about whether you should trust social media influencers, financial advisors and other consultants if they're wealthy. And before doing that, if you yourself are wealthy and a high net wealth individual or indeed an expat, you can go over to adamfire.com and see how I can help you. Now, one thing I find quite amusing is my social media team told me about a year ago that people were Googling my net worth. Apparently when people Google my name, it's one of the most common things they'll ask Google. Now, originally, as I mentioned, I found it kind of amusing and even a bit shallow why people would be Googling my name and that particular term. But when I thought about it more carefully, I do actually think there's a logic to those kind of questions, even though everybody knows that when it comes to private individuals, it's very hard to know their exact net worth. And I'll tell you why. Online, there's a lot of obviously fake rich people. Usually you can tell that they're fake rich people by the fact they act very flamboyant and they're acting in a certain way, jackets with gold or diamonds on them, or they're on their boats sipping their glass of champagne or whatever. They're trying as hard as possible to look wealthy, and the vast majority of those people are either not wealthy or indeed they may be wealthy, but they're just trying to kind of leverage the fact they're wealthy, and sometimes that's a little bit unethical. However, what I do think is the case is that when you're looking for service providers, it's good to know the following things. So number one, it's good to know how established a person is. So for example, if I was looking for legal services, I would trust somebody who is a self-made multimillionaire who doesn't need my money much more than I would trust somebody who is just starting out or somebody who is trying too hard to look wealthy. I would intrinsically trust them, assuming they've actually made that money themselves, not if they've just inherited it from daddy, right? That's one thing. But then secondly, I think it's always good to know if somebody is actually practicing what they preach. So when I, for example, go to the doctor, I personally do not trust a doctor as much if they are vastly overweight or they're smoking or they're drinking above the recommended alcohol limit every single week, or I suspect they are. I'm not a doctor myself, but if I see the colour of their nose and it looks like they're drinking too much, it kind of puts me off a little bit. Now, obviously, rationally, I know that that doesn't mean that their advice isn't true, but it's quite hard to take it, right, from somebody, who's sitting across from you who, in many cases is more unhealthy than I am. Now, this kind of leads me back to, say, people in the finance industry. I don't think it's the case at all that people need to care about how wealthy their advisor is precisely, because if everybody did that, all that would happen is 100% of business would go to the advisor in the world who has the highest net worth, and that would be silly and it wouldn't make any sense at all. But what I do think is the case is if an advisor is practicing what he or she preaches, that's something which is, very valuable. For example, if you've got an advisor who's making loads of money, but they're just spending loads of money and they're broke, and I've met some people like that before, then that isn't really probably the kind of person you want to take advice from, even if the advice they're giving is correct. Likewise, if you've got an advisor who's just starting out, obviously everyone has to start from somewhere. I had to start from somewhere, but if they're not, for example, writing on big publications or they themselves haven't got that credibility, obviously most people are going to be a bit wary about dealing with that person. So I think when it comes to these kind of things, it's not a black and white issue. It doesn't have to be one extreme or the other. I personally do trust people more if they're self-made and wealthy. They don't have to be super wealthy, but if they've come from nothing and become wealthy, I do trust them a bit more, assuming I get a good vibe from them. But in addition to that, I think practicing what you preach is really important. So for example, for me, one of the reasons I started targeting expat is I myself am an expat. So therefore, when my clients ask me things like, well, I'm thinking about changing my residency, I'm thinking about changing my bank account, I can say, well, it's not just from my client's experience, I'm not just advising them, I myself are doing these kind of things. And likewise, when it comes to some of my higher net worth clients, I can actually say to them, well, these high net worth investments, I myself have gone into those investments myself. So I think those kind of things are really, really important, because you are actually showing you've got skin in the game, that if something goes wrong, you yourself are also going to be held accountable, essentially, indirectly, because something has gone wrong. And likewise, when it comes to things like when I got invited to the Forbes Council online, one or two of my clients said, it's great that you've been invited to this, because I read online that you have to be making at least $1 million a year as a business to be invited. And I said to him, I'm kind of surprised you looked that up. And he said to me, yes, but I think it is important, because it shows obviously some traction has been made, some quite big traction. So I think it's very tempting to say that anyone who looks at things like net worth is just being shallow. But in reality, there is some logic and rationale attached to it, because somebody who has got a great deal of traction is less likely to rip you off, is more likely to have skin in the game, and so on. But I do think in the current social media world, not so much when it comes to legal advisors or people who are financial advisors to high net worth, but more those kind of influencer people who are targeting very young people with online courses, impressionable 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds. There are a lot of people out there who are giving shallow and misleading advice. They're taking videos next to their Ferrari or whatever, oftentimes is rented, or their Lamborghini, which is rented. I think there has been some really bad cases of people pretending to be wealthy and ripping people off, but that's usually targeted at very young people, which in some ways makes it worse, right, because they're impressionable. So that would be my take on it. I think when you're dealing with people, not just when it comes to financial people, but also consultants, also legal advisors, in corporation companies or wherever it is, you don't have to deal necessarily with the very wealthiest person in that niche. You don't have to deal with the most credible person in that niche, the person who's writing on all the biggest publications online. But by the same token, if you're dealing with somebody who, clearly is established, is writing on big publications, has a decent net worth, has a big track record, obviously that's reassuring, because let's face it, they don't need to rip you off, they don't need to be dodgy if they've already got traction themselves.
Depends on every person's individual goals, how much money they want to invest, how long they want to invest. And I did not have at all the feeling from any bank with which I had contact with that they were interested in these things. Whereas with you, it was from the very beginning obvious to me that you had experience in these matters and also were interested in what I wanted to achieve.
Anyways, I'm very, very pleased and positive to say that I believe I've picked the right one. The results in the last couple of years have overreached my expectations by far. And I see no reason why it should not continue. Of course, I can highly recommend him as your financial advisor for now and for the future, because hesitating is missing out.
So I'm investing a lot in the Middle East market, but the amount of returns I'm getting from there is very low as per the amount of returns I'm getting from the investment portfolio which you made for me. Obviously, the best result in market right now is Adam.